Boom. Cool. This is going to be really exciting. So yeah, I'm going to try to include as many of these suggestions as possible into our final evening next week. So this is going to be really exciting. So yeah, just keep on adding in any that you like. We're probably going to start quicker than usual, just because I want to make sure that I really give us time for this family, because this family is so challenging. And please feel free to ask lots of questions in case anything I say doesn't make sense. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Our final family. We will share the screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, how do I move this thing? And, okay, come on, and present. Here we go. Welcome to our 8th week of Plant Families in Our Foods and Nature Journaling. This will be our final family that we're going to be going over in our series. So I'm excited to have you all with me tonight. And here, this one, we're going to be having a little bit different of a format than we normally do, just because this particular family, as a warning, is very vocabulary heavy. So I'm going to try really, really hard to make it so that it's not quite as focused on vocabulary. I'm going to try to be breaking it down so that it's not, but I anticipate that we're going to be moving through this at a bit more of a slower pace because of all of the vocabulary that this particular family has. So without further ado, here is our first picture. So, as usual, let's take 2 minutes to sketch what we see. Again, don't worry about being perfect, just sketch whatever you see for 2 minutes. Well, yeah, for 2 minutes. And then after that, we'll take an additional minute to add any words, observations, questions, descriptions, and numbers to our pictures. Starting now.
You on then? Can you hear me?
Oh, that looks like something really dangerous for my dogs.
So take just a few more seconds.
That looks dangerous.
And now let's take an extra minute to add any words and numbers to our picture. And let's take a few more seconds. And there's our minute. Okay, we'll go to our next photo. And again, let's take 2 minutes to sketch what we see. Let's take a few more seconds. And there's our 2 minutes. And so now let's take an extra minute to add any words, observations, descriptions, questions, and numbers to our picture. Let's take a few more seconds. And there's our minute. Okay, here's our third picture. And again, we'll take our 2 minutes to sketch. We'll take a few more seconds. And there's our 2 minutes. So now we'll take an extra minute to add any words and numbers to our pictures. We'll take a few more seconds. And there's our minute. Now, instead of that only being 3, we have a 4th picture, just because there's another part of this plant that we want to look at. And then after this, I'll go back to the first one so people can take a screenshot. So again, we'll take our 2 minutes to sketch what we see. We'll take a few more seconds. And there's our 2 minutes. And then 1 more minute to add any words and numbers to our pictures. Okay, just a few more seconds. There's our minute. I'm going to go back to the first slide so that people can take a screenshot if they would like, who came in late. Here's our first slide. I'll give everybody a couple of seconds to take a screenshot. And there we go. Ready to meet our family? Okay, here we go. Welcome, as I'm sure you guessed, to the grass family, also known as Poaceae. That one is named for the poa, which is the bluegrass genus. And in fact, one of the ones that we just drew was a bluegrass. And our original name for it, as you can see, was Gramineae. which was derived from a Latin word meaning grass-like. And I personally think that the word sounds a lot like grain, so I kind of miss the old term, but Poaceae is cool too. And the poem that I put up here, you might see different versions of this poem in different botany books or hear from different botanists, and people all have their different ways of saying it. So I kind of added my own twist to it. And it goes, sedges have edges, rushes are round, grasses are hollow from their seed heads to the ground, except where their nodes are found. That winds up helping because there are a lot of different plants that look a lot like grasses, but they're not grasses. And the two that get most commonly mistaken are sedges and rushes, but they're in their own families. So that's why the poem is there, is to help people tell them apart a bit. So whenever you are not sure if it's a grass or not, feel it. And if it feels sort of like a triangle in grass form, then it's probably a sedge. As for rushes, I've also heard them being described as lily turned into grass. I'm not sure quite why. But grasses, it's the nodes that are really distinctive about them. They look like knobby knees. I will go back quickly and say which grasses we've already seen, and then we will go on to our first. So this one here, this one is Hordeum murinum, also known, I think, as false barley. So this is a false barley, very common, as you can see, very common in cities and on streets, growing up for the pavement a lot. This one, I believe, is a seed head of the annual bluegrass. So this is Poa annua, which the family is named after. This one here, I think it's soft brome or Bromus hordaceus. So it's probably a brome, which is spelled B-R-O-M-E. And our final one here, with a strange color that I almost never see on this particular part of it, is probably panic veldtgrass. And that's kind of a weird name. Once I can get my chat, here we go, I can type that in. I can type that name in because that name is so weird. Panic veldtgrass. And later on, I can type in the poem as well. Here we go. So, as I warned, our plant happens to have a lot of vocabulary. If this annoys you, blame the botanists. I'm going to try to make this as gentle on us as possible. So for our usual flowers, we have our stem, we have our sepals, which are the little leaf-like things often that kind of encircle the rest of the flower. We have our petals, we have our stamens, which makes pollen, and our pistils that make seeds. And as you've heard me say before, I like to remember that as PSSP. Pistils make seeds and stamens make pollen. Now, the grass is a little bit different than that. It still has our stamens in here, usually 3, but not always. And if you have a grass that has a different number of stamens, that's significant and that can help you identify it. Usually we will have some fluffy styles here on top of the pistil in order to be able to catch the pollen grains as they fly around, because grasses are typically wind pollinated. And then we have these 2 little scales down here. Instead of having petals or sepals, we have these, which are called loticules. You don't have to remember that. They're modified sepals, little scaly things here. And then here's where it gets interesting. We also have a lemma and a palea. And those are just fancy words for bracts, which we're going to go over in a second what those are. I should warn in advance too, I meant to try to take a photo of a flower of grass as best I could, but I haven't been able to, because either they're so small that I can't see them, or else they fall, or else maybe they're just not there to begin with. So this is pretty much the closest I got. I think it doesn't help that it's kind of closed. But I think that these might be the pistils. No, not the pistils. These might be the stamens kind of dangling out, hopefully leaving pollen on the wind. I'm not totally sure, but just wanted you to know that I couldn't take a picture. So this is our flower of our family. Does anybody need more time to write down any of this stuff, or? Yeah, 1 more minute. Okay,
Yeah, please.
No problem. Yeah, we're going to be talking about bracts more in a second. Sometimes I think that they can be mistaken for being sepals, or they could be mistaken for being leaves, but they're neither one. They're kind of in between the two. Bracts are modified leaves. So we'll be going over that in a second. And you might be wondering why we go through the trouble of having lemma and palea like labeled and named different things. Apparently, if you look at some of the differences or the lengths or different things, then grass specialists use that to help identify what they're looking at. Grasses are ridiculously challenging to identify. I'll tell you all a story about that in a second too.
Grasses have 3 stamens then?
Most do, but some don't, and the ones that don't it's unusual enough that it will help you identify them. But most of them will have 3 stamens, yeah. And that's significant too. There are kind of 2 main branches of all flowering plants. One of them are called dicotyledons or dicots, where you have 2 seed leaves. All of the ones that we've discussed so far in this series have been dicots, and they will often have, sepals, petals, stamens, etc., in patterns of 4 or 5. Then there are the monocots that have 1 seed leaf, and they will often have patterns in multiples of 3, so 3s, 6s, and 9s. Grasses are one of the monocots, as are lilies, as are sedges, as are a few others. So that's why the 3. That's significant. Okay, here, I'm going to go on to our next one. And you don't have to remember or write down any of this list. I only include this list here to make fun of the botanists, really, even though I am a botanist. And that's because we haven't really talked about bracts yet. So a bract is a modified leaf that is directly beneath the flower, or also known as the inflorescence of a plant. It's not sepals, but it's not leaves either. So for example, right here on our bird of paradise, this right here would be a bract. You might be able to see it's a little bit separate from the rest of the flower. And these might be sepals, or they might be petaloid sepals, they might be petals. We're not really sure, but the petals and the sepals are up here, but this is a bract, it's separate. And then I'm sure y'all might remember too. Does anybody remember this family?
Well, that's a thistle.
It's a thistle. And I think I saw Sandy mouthing it. I couldn't hear you, but you said Asteraceae, right? Yeah, so this is our Asteraceae. So as you might remember, all of these are individual flowers. This isn't one flower. These are dozens, if not hundreds of flowers, all here on this particular plant. This one is a artichoke, but it's closely related to the thistle. So I totally see why, thistle. So that means that each of these little flowers have their own petals and sepals, as you might remember. So these guys down here are the bracts, the part that we eat of the artichokes.
Oh.
And then you might remember this is another member of the Asteraceae family, which means that all of our flowers are up here. These are the bracts, these green bits. So I just wanted to include that because that's kind of something we haven't gone over yet. So apparently there are a ton of different names for bracts depending on where they are and what kind of plant they're on. You don't have to remember any of these. The 3 we're going to be talking about today are just these 3. Just these 3 for the grasses. But these are all different ways of just saying bracts. So that way, a little less scary, I hope. So here's our grass habit. Ignore this little drawing over here, like that was a different thing. So we have 1 stem, usually just 1. If the stem branches off, then that's significant too. It's usually just the 1 stem. Also called a culm, we don't need to remember that. We have our knobby knees, which are called nodes. Some botanists call it joints. But that is very distinctive to grasses. So that's another way to tell that you're looking at a grass. And those are the parts where the grass isn't hollow, but everything in between in the internode area, that's where it's hollow. And then we have our leaves. They might seem really simple at first glance. They start here from the node, but for about half or more, or less rather, of the leaf, they sheathe the stem. They wrap around the stem. And then right at one point, they finally kind of branch off and dangle. But this alone is not the leaf. This isn't only the part of the leaf, it's also down here. And then last but not least, we have our seed heads or our inflorescence. So that's our grass habit, the growth habit. In other words, it's pretty much a twig with some leaves and like little tiny grainy flowers on them, but the botanists decided to make it complicated. I'll tell you all a quick story. So when I was 15 years old, back in 2001, and yeah, that means I'm old, I had a summertime internship out in the Presidio, San Francisco, monitoring this one serpentine grassland. And what we were doing was line point transect monitoring, where we would lie out one of those really, really long kind of roll-up measuring tapes, ones that were like several meters long. And every 3 meters, we would put down a flag, and every single grass that touched that flag, we'd have to identify. Sounds fun, right? Except it was the summertime where, it was the summertime where all of the dead non-native annual grasses had dropped their seed heads. So try to imagine identifying about 20 or 30 different kinds where this is the only part you get to see. Not fun. So that's probably why all of the specialized terms. I'm going to give folks a second to do this while I figure out what's going on with the door, but you can take a look at this and I'll be right back. Okay, so I include this because I thought it might help to kind of break down seed heads and what they're all about. We have the main seed head or the inflorescence. They have different names in botany. So in this particular case, because of the way that the stems of it kind of branch out, it's called a panicle, but they have other names for other kinds of arrangements. When you look at just one of these that come off, then we call that the branch. That's the branch. So all of this is the branch. And then from there, we look a little bit closer to one sort of, I guess, twig off of the branches, and that is our spikelet. And then from there, each one of these little things in here are a floret. And it, that can be what it looks like when it opens. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 florets in what I drew. These down here, though, these are the glooms or the bracts again. So we have bracts here, and then we have bracts here again with the palea and the lemma. And so this is kind of what it all looks like together. So we have seed heads to branches to spikelets to florets. And that's kind of how that goes. And
real quick, Avea, on that one. The spikelet, where did you say, are the bracts the bottom two on the spikelet or only on the last one, the floret one?
I'm so glad you asked. Both of them have bracts, but they are called different things. So
okay,
these
different
are
kinds of bracts.
Yep. So these are bracts and these are bracts too. So these little ones down here are called glooms. And then these ones here are called the lower one is called the lemma and the upper one is called the palea. And I will go back so that you can see these are the names.
Ooh, so got it. Okay.
The glooms, the lemma, and the palea. I'm glad that you asked. Does anybody else, speaking of which, does anybody else have any questions right now? I know we've kind of covered a lot.
Can you just go over that again about which is the gloom, lemma, and palea on the other picture?
Absolutely. Here we go. Oh, sorry. Okay, so here on the spikelets, these are the glooms. So the glooms subtend all of the florets that are up here. So the glooms will oftentimes be beneath a bunch of different florets. The palea and the lemma over here, or rather I guess this one's sort of beneath this other one. So I guess that this would be the lemma and that would be the palea. So the lemma and the palea subtend a single floret. But it's pretty much just a way of saying bracts here and bracts there too.
Thank you. Now I get it.
I'm glad that you asked. Any other question? Okay, we'll go on to our next one. One more little bit of, of vocab. So we're looking at a little bit of a close-up of the leaf, or rather where the leaf separates from the main stem. So you can imagine that the leaf continues down here and that it sheaths over here. So the part where the leaf is wrapped around the stem of the grass is called the sheath. Sort of think of it like for a sword. The sheath is the part that kind of keeps the rest of it in. And then the part where it comes off is the blade. So when they say blade of grass, they tend to mean that part, the part that comes off of the stem. Now I include this part because there's a little something that sticks up that I had you all draw in the fourth picture called a ligule. That's another thing that winds up being really, really helpful in identifying grasses. And even if you can't identify them, it just is fun to look at because they're cute and they look like a little secret that the grass has. The one that in our picture was purple, which was really unusual. I've never seen them in purple before. Usually I see them in white, but they're called ligule. And then there's a little thing here in the front. Sometimes there'll be lobes or sometimes little hairs, but these are called the auricles. And I include those because those are really helpful to look at when you're identifying. So in our next picture, you don't have to draw any of what I'm about to show you in the next picture, but what I would like is if folks would like to call out descriptive words for any of these. So you don't have to draw them, but just look for a second at some of the diversity that you see in the different ligules. Look and see how they might look a little bit different from each other. Or in these cases, you might see auricles here with these lobes. This one, maybe no auricles, no auricles, no auricles, auricles. So does anybody want to call out and just say some descriptive words that they see?
Unjoined.
When I first looked at them, I saw that, I thought that looks like my knee before I had my knee
Yes.
replacement.
It's exactly what I
Legally.
thought.
Those are good descriptions. Yeah, any it reminds me of are great. Any other descriptions? Any others?
Some are more angular and some are more curvy, the ligules.
Angular and curvy. Yep, very curvy here.
Some are more hairy. It's like some have shaved and some haven't.
Yes, some have shaved and some haven't. I like that. I think some are very fine, very finely dissected here, whereas some are, some would be called tall. I'd think of this one as being a little bit taller than the others. And maybe
And
one
some-
like, oh yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say some have cones. It looks like cones
Ooh,
in the middle right there.
this one?
Yeah, and the next one and the two below have a cone shape when it's dissected there.
Yeah,
Dissected.
I like that. This one here reminds me a little bit of a mountain range. I guess a lot of them do, but this one in particular does because of how it goes up and down and up and down. Whereas this one is a bit more straight, so it reminds me more of a grass field. And sometimes the auricles look more like hair. So it makes me think of hair.
Whiskers.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Whiskers. Cat's
Whiskers.
whiskers, that one. Good one.
Yeah, whiskers. I like that. Yeah, it's difficult to do, but sometimes it's the describing words that will help the most when it's difficult to kind of convey what's different about each of them. And because sometimes they might look the same if you just look at them one at a time. I think it can be really good to compare two different kinds of grasses sometimes, do joint comparisons, because then, oh, I see some indented or ridged. Some look like they're hugging. Ice cream cones, furry. I'm reading the chat and I'm seeing some really lovely descriptions here. Much dirtier than joints. So yeah, there's the more you can do that, the more that you can come up with descriptive words and then even compare them to each other, then the easier it gets to see the differences. And you begin to see how characteristic some of them are of each other. That, by the way, was how we wind up having to identify the grasses that one summer that I spent out in the field, because we had no seed heads to go by. And part of why I even drew this to begin with is because I still don't know a lot of the grasses, and I feel incomplete. It just grinds my gears that I don't know them. So I'm going to try to learn them, hopefully with their seed heads, and then I'm going to test myself by ripping off the seed heads and trying to tell them apart by their auricles and ligules, just because I'm a weirdo. And so yeah, thank you for letting me share my insanity with you. Okay. Here are the characteristics of Poaceae that we've talked about. We have one main stem that does not usually branch off. If it does, that's significant. We have leaves that sheath the main stem. The leaves will begin at the nodes. Not that you can always tell though, because they are sheathed until further up the stem. So they don't separate at the nodes. They only separate further up. And at the point where they do separate, we have those lovely little, I guess, what would we call those? Well, yeah, we have ligules and auricles, and some of them can be really thin looking, almost film-like, I want to say. They're very delicate looking. The seed heads, like we saw, will usually have several florets, but they're in different arrangements. So sometimes we'll have where there's like no stems on them, and then we call that a spike when there's no stems coming off, or the panicle, like the ones we saw where they're really open. There's a bunch of different terms. And most of the time the grasses are wind pollinated, which is probably why they're so numerous. In terms of the number of species, grasses, I believe, are maybe the 5th largest family in the world. So after a few others, but I'm imagining that the actual landmass that they take up might be a lot bigger, but though I'm not totally sure. And as always, remember to let the plant that's in front of you tell you.
Ivea?
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question about the image, the drawing you had 2 slides previously, I think.
Okay.
Where you showed
This one?
that one. Okay, it says blade, but those look like little threads.
Oh, I apologize. These, yeah, this was not one of my better drawings, I have to say. These are meant to be the veins of the grass.
Okay. So it's part of a leaf, a blade leaf, right? Got it. Thank you.
They usually will have one main one, but if you notice, this is another trait that a lot of monocots have, is that, I mean, it's not only a monocot trait, but you might notice that with some of the dicots, they might have branching veins, but monocots, and this isn't always the case, but monocots usually tend to have parallel veins. So that's another thing that tells you monocot.
Great.
If I ever teach this class again, we'll go over monocots versus dicots at some point for fun. So that's what that was meant to. My pleasure. Thank you for asking. Are there any other questions? Okay. Now we get to another fun part. Oh, sorry, Sandy, were you about to say something?
Can you show the poem, the memory poem again, please?
Oh, totally. Here it is. Sedges have edges, rushes are round. Grasses are hollow from their seed heads to the ground, except where their nodes are found. Awesome. Okay, now let's see what foods we have. And I'll let you all call out first before I say anything. What foods, and I'm sure we know a ton, but what foods do you know of that are in Poaceae or the grass family?
How about wheat?
I heard wheat, and then what was the other one? Sorry.
Barley.
Barley. Yep.
Barley.
All the grains that we eat in that family?
Flax.
Ask that.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Are all the grains that we eat in that family, or are some in another plant family?
There are some that are in others. I think that some people think of quinoa as, oh, not again. Some people think of quinoa as one, but it's not. Okay, I'm going to do this and I will be right back again.
I don't see sorghum eaten that much anymore.
I don't either. To be honest, I don't really know what it looks like either. I don't think I've ever eaten it, but I included it because I know that some people might have eaten it or heard of it.
Would flax be in that group?
I'm not sure about flax. That's a good question, though.
Or another.
Could also ask chia.
That's what I was just about to say. Another grain of chia, but that's in the sunflower family, isn't it?
Salvia.
It's in the mint family. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I knew it was a family we had done.
Yep. And then we have quinoa is not in the Poaceae family. That's in the amaranth family, along with spinach and some others. So that's where the quinoa is. When you see it in seed form, it looks a little bit like a big version of amaranth, which is kind of fun.
What about sugarcane?
Yep. Sugarcane is indeed a grass.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay, thanks.
I remember being in total shock when I had learned that sugarcane was a grass. This huge grass.
When we were kids, we used to break off a piece of grass and suck on it, and it was sweet. So I'm really not surprised myself.
Excuse me, there is buckwheat a grass? Buckwheat?
I'm glad you asked. Buckwheat is in its own family as well.
Wow.
And now I'm trying to remember what the name is. Oh yeah, Polygonaceae. Let me write that down.
Yeah. Is buckwheat the Aragonium that people eat?
Yes, although that particular one, I don't know if that one's edible or not. I know that one's a
Right.
native plant, but that is the same family,
Okay.
the Polygonaceae. It's not letting me do the chat, so I can't type the name in for you, but yeah, it's in a different family as well.
Thank you.
Okay, flax is in the Linaceae family.
So a different
You already
family.
say that. Okay.
No, 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 I saw you wrote it in the chat, so I'm glad you said it.
Isn't it the same as for linen? I mean, flax is linen. I mean, linen comes from flax, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Are there any other questions or any other things?
Excuse me, Yvette, just another question about flax. What about flaxseed? Because I used to grow flaxseed in the garden. It's got a little blue flower and it's a tiny plant. I don't think they would make linen out of it, the one I had. So flax itself is something different, isn't it? From flaxseed.
And I grow that blue flax plant in my backyard. It's very ephemeral. I mean, they're the stems are really thin, right? And they sort of wave in the wind like little blue. But I don't know. I sew and I knit, and I think there's some kind of flax plant that linen comes from, that the fiber that's used in fabric comes from. I'll have to look it up. I'll Google it.
The seed actually that we eat does come from that blue flower. My mother discovered this by she accidentally grew some of those lovely blue flowers that had dropped from her bird feeder.
Mm.
You know, the flaxseed feeder that with the little sock form that they make for the that the goldfinches love.
I think it would
Yes,
be fun.
I think the flax that they use for fabric and stuff is a New Zealand flax, which is like a really leathery, wide, grassy looking leaf, but it's very tall and thick and strong. It's not like flaxseed at all. It's the opposite.
It'd be interesting to look into it, and I would find that to be a fun question to research. It wouldn't surprise me if they were different plants in the same family, or maybe they use different kinds of plants in the same, because some of them, like for example, take the false barley that we were looking at earlier. It's in the same genus, to my understanding, as you know, the barley that we eat, but it's not one that we would normally eat. So I'm imagining it might possibly be the same for flax. But I would like to research that more. Oh, that reminds me. I don't remember who told me last week that lovely galaxy looking flower was a petunia. And I said I'd look it up, I promised. I did, and you were right, it was a petunia. So that question last week, unfortunately, it wound up being a trick question by sheer accident, but you taught me a new plant and I'm so happy. It was a galaxy petunia. So see, even somebody like me who has been playing with plants for years, even I don't know, obviously I don't know all the plants, but even I get to learn plants that are new, and even I get tricked by plants sometimes because I was so sure that was a morning glory, and then I learned otherwise. So thank you. Now that kind of stuff, that makes me happy. I love when I learn new things like that. So thank you. Okay, I apologize. This next section is going to be a little bit shorter than we like it, but are y'all ready for for spot the Fabaceae? I mean, no, spot the Poaceae. Are y'all ready?
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Vera.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, is flower from the?
Yep. Flour, I think, at least the usual, the most common flour is made from the wheat, I think. But then flour can be made from other things too. Like I've heard of spelt flour and some other kinds. But yeah, there is wheat flour, and that is also from the grasses. I would dare say this family, despite how it grows, like in a lot of cases, we just see them like kind of low to the ground, or sometimes they're a bit taller, but considering how much we overlook this family winds up being really, really important to our diets, really important. This winds up being some of the most important, in some places that might be half of our diet right here. Another thing is that a family we mentioned earlier, the Fabaceae or the pea family or bean family, you'll also find that a lot of those, both in terms of food and in terms of ecosystems, will be growing together. Because if you eat those together, a legume and a grain, then you get complete protein. Also, the grasses tend to kind of be carbon sinks, so they gather a lot of carbon. Whereas with the beans, because of their bacteria in their roots, they tend to be able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. And so the two of them wind up working really well together in ecological situations, which is why if you're growing cover crops, that's why you will often have wheats with maybe like bell beans or vetches or something like that. So just wanted to mention that too. Okay, are you ready for Spot the Poaceae? I apologize that this one is going to be so short, but here we go.
Are you going to put up a poll? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen. I have two screens on today.
I see almost everybody has guessed. So we'll take just a few more seconds. And again, don't worry. Again, this is all just learning. So yeah, it's all just learning. I would ordinarily have included more specimens to look from, but I was having trouble finding more. But here we go. Are you all ready for the answer? Okay, here we go. It was C, our annual bluegrass again. Now, I know that these other ones look very similar to it. This one looks like it has little sections in it, but with the thing that both of these don't have, that this one has, or sorry, yeah, is that these ones do not have the nodes or the joints. You might notice that they're missing those nodes that we have right here. And you might notice that the flowers of this one look a little bit different than our seed heads here. To my knowledge, this one is a horsetail, I believe, an equisetum. And this one I'm not totally sure of, but I thought it might be an ornamental, possibly garlic or onion of some kind, or something in a similar family to it, which so far they've been kind of dividing up the lily family with the asparagus and everything else. But this right here is our grass. And if we do a big, test with lots of families next week, then I'll try to have some more samples. Maybe I'll try to find the sedges and the rushes. So just as a quick recap, our characteristics of our Poaceae are one main stem, leaves that begin here at the nodes and then are sheathed until further up the stem, the ligules and the auricles right in here where the leaves separate from the stem, and seed heads, usually with several little tiny florets on them, and then they're wind pollinated. And that is our slides. But does anybody have any questions before I go away from the screen?
I have questions.
Mhm.
Back on the false barley picture that you showed us at the very beginning, one of my questions was, how many bristles are there? And then I thought, what's the correct word? Are those called awns?
Awns, thank you. I can't believe I forgot to draw that. Yes, these bristles here are called awns.
So is each one of those a floret?
Now that I'm not totally sure of. I was thinking that there's something that stick off of either the lemma or the palea. I know that Botany in a Day mislabels that as being the pistil, and it's not the pistil. So they're wrong about that.
How do you spell that?
Oh, here, I will, if I can write it, I will. It's AWN. The awn. I should have drawn that. I even told myself to draw that and then I forgot. So I'm really glad that you asked me about that.
That looks like the thing that is not good for dogs.
Yes.
Walking your dog and
it looks like ripgut.
Huh?
It looks like ripgut.
Ripgut, ripgut is another one, ripgut brome. That one is Bromus diandrus, and it has some of the longest awns that you will ever see. The ripgut brome. They're even longer than the false barley.
The foxtail is what's so bad for the dogs.
This one also goes by that name too. I used to hear it called farmer's foxtail.
But if you're a child, it makes a beautiful fairy wand.
One question?
Somebody said it makes a beautiful something.
Fairy wand.
Looks really dangerous to me.
Did anybody else have any questions about, oh, here we go. Let's see here. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. And then what we can do now is, we only have a few minutes left, but if anybody would like to share or just like share any experiences or any journal pages, then we would love to hear from you. So let me know and I will spotlight you.